Hi all, and welcome to the latest video in my series on American history. Today we're looking at one of the most important elections in American history, the 1860 election. In this we see a split in one of the major parties, the Democrats. We see the first ever Republican president in the form of Abraham Lincoln, and we then also see secession. So this is a really important election with big impact. Right, we're going to start with the conventions. The Republican one is probably the most straightforward, or is definitely the most straightforward of the two, because there's only one Republican convention. As often happens at this point in American history, going into the convention there is a front runner, and coming out of the convention that front runner hasn't won. The front runner was William Seward, a leading member of the Republican Party, very key in the abolitionist movement. He won the first ballot, he won the second ballot, but on the third, Lincoln comes through and takes it. So Seward had been ahead in those first two ballots, but he hadn't actually got enough votes for an overall victory. Now, why did Lincoln come through then and succeed? Well, partly he was considered to be the more moderate candidate. So some in the Republican Party were worried that Seward, though appealing to kind of strong Republican supporters, might be seen as being too far towards the abolitionist radicals to appeal across the board in the North. Lincoln was more moderate, and they'd seen his appeal during the Lincoln-Douglas debates in the campaign in 1858 in Illinois. Now, the other thing about this, and that was illustrated, is that Lincoln might well be the best Republican candidate to beat Douglas in the West. Now, that was going to be a very key battleground. Obviously, the Republicans aren't going to win in the South. They're not even going to try, actually. But the West is a really important battleground for them. So they need to pick up not only the states in the Northeast, they also need to pick up the new Western states. The platform set up by the Republicans focused on their kind of anti-slavery stance. So they opposed the fugitive slave law. They took a strong stance against the expansion of slavery. They also proposed tariffs and the Homesteaders Act. I said there's a strong stance against slavery, but it's really important to note that at this point the Republicans are not saying they are going to abolish slavery. This is not an abolitionist platform. There's no desire or aim put in here where slavery is in any threat where it already exists. What they don't want to see is it expanding. Right, so conventions for the Democrats are a bit more complicated. So the first one took place in Charleston in South Carolina. Probably not the best choice if you're looking for sectional harmony at this point. Again, going in the front, there's a front runner, that is Stephen Douglas, but a lot of the Southern members at the convention are really strongly opposed to him because of the Freeport doctrine that we saw in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And they decided to try and hijack Douglas, and they kind of started a power block at the convention, a kind of stop Douglas one. And they tried to impose a very kind of pro-slavery platform, which would then mean even if Douglas won the nomination, that he wouldn't be able to run because he wouldn't be able to support the platform. And they got control of the platform committee, and they produced a very explicitly pro-slavery document, endorsing the Dred Scott decision, protecting slavery in the territories. Now, the Northern Democrats, essentially, they refused to give ground on this. They refused to accept this platform. So we've got the two sides in the convention going to war over this. One of the things that's really odd in the Democrats at this point is the remaining National Party. Because the North is bigger than the South, there are more Northern members of the convention than there are Southern members of the convention, even though the Democrats has by this point become predominantly a Southern party. So the South, which is where the Democrats definitively get all the votes, are feeling that, well, this is our party, they should be listening to us, rather than has been strung along by what is actually within the party a Northern minority, because the Democrats aren't as strongly supported in the North. But the mathematics meant that a Northern platform was adopted, which is more in line with what Douglas wanted. And at this point, a group of Southerners storm out, led by a guy called William Yancey. You can see his photo in the bottom corner, and they just walked out of the convention in protest. So what happens next? Well, those Remain decided to vote on who should be the presidential nominee. Douglas leads, and quite substantially, 145.5 votes. But the convention rules meant that he needed a two-thirds majority. And Caleb Cushing, whose picture is above me, decides to change the rules in the convention to make this even more difficult to achieve. Because he says it's two-thirds of the convention, including as if the 50 members were still there from the South. There were 57 ballots held. Douglas won all 57, but at no point did he get enough votes to get to that two-thirds majority. And on May the 3rd, the delegates have voted to adjourn the convention and reconvene in Baltimore 6 weeks later, hoping they could find some kind of common ground and some kind of solution to the problem. In short, they didn't. So we see the Democrats reconvene at the Front Street Theater, which you can see a photo of above, in Baltimore, Maryland. Again, maybe a slightly better choice of somewhere where you might get a bit of compromise meeting in this key kind of border state near Washington, D.C. So the first round of business is, well, do we let the people who left the Charleston session, do we let them back in? And they discussed this, and they decided really that they should let them back in, apart from those that they saw as leading and causing the problems, which were those from Louisiana and Alabama, so William Yancey included. So that's the conclusion they came to. At that point, there's uproar amongst the rest of the Southern delegates, and most of them now withdraw. So we're left with a convention which has pretty much just got the Northern Democrats in it. They hold 2 more votes to see if they can elect Douglas. Again, he's still not getting the two-thirds majority on the rules that have been created by at the previous convention. Now, as we then go forwards, they kind of overrode that convention that had been set up by Cushing, and they then held this unanimous voice vote and says, right, Douglas has more than 2/3 of the vote and he is nominated. Meanwhile, in the Maryland Institute in Baltimore, the Southern Democrats are meeting in a rival convention, and they adapt a very radical pro-slavery platform, and they nominate Breckinridge for president. So, and you can see from so we have 2 conventions for the same party. We have 2 candidates from the same party, and essentially the Democrat Party has now been torn in half. Now, traditionally, a lot of historians look at this and wonder, this is what just hands Lincoln the electoral victory. Now, it isn't quite that straightforward, and we'll have a look at some of the numbers in a map to try and explain that in a minute. But so who are our candidates? Well, we've got Lincoln, who is Republican, and he says, I want to contain slavery where it exists, stop it from spreading to the territories, and he's not even on the ballot in 10 of the southern states. So he's running in the north, running in the west, not running in the south. Stephen Douglas, running across the country, still going on about this idea of popular sovereignty that he's been hammering on about since 1850, so a whole decade of it gone by now. He's opposing slave codes in the territories, so really stopping the expansion of slavery, but he's trying to do it in a slightly softer way than Lincoln. He says he is the only candidate who can appeal in both the North and the South. We've also then got John Breckinridge, also a Democrat. He supports the Dred Scott decision. The expansion of slavery is something that he's pushing. He says it should be allowed in all the territories. He's saying that the Fugitive Slave Act needs to be properly implemented in the North, and so really kind of pushing that pro-South agenda. And then we got John Bell, who had a lot of sympathy amongst a lot of Americans at this point in time. Who's just going, right, let's just put this issue of slavery to one side and let's concentrate on everything else. People have just been going on about this, and it is going to tear the country in half. So he is kind of a union vote. He wants to keep the union together. He doesn't want it all to fall apart. Unfortunately, as we know, John Bell doesn't get his wish. So the results come in. If we look at it in terms of the colours on the map, then you can see Lincoln wins the north, Breckinridge wins the south, Bell wins some of the bits in terms of the border states, and Douglas wins not very much at all. Now, Lincoln doesn't get a single vote in the south. So this is the basis then of a lot of stuff that we'll see in terms of secession and Southern complaints. How can we have a precedent when we didn't all voted against him? This shows the system's unfair. Douglas, I think, has probably got the most reason to be upset with the results. We can see he's got almost 1.4 million votes, 30% of the vote. He only gets 12 electoral college seats from that. Essentially, he comes second everywhere. He comes second to Breckinridge. He comes second to Lincoln in particular. He comes second to Bell. Now, Lincoln wins 180 electoral college votes with only 40% of the vote, or just under 40% of the vote. So is he handed the election result by the split of the Democrats? Well, no, he's not. If we take Breckinridge's votes and we add it to Douglas's votes, then we're only on 84. Even if we then add Bell's votes in as well, we're still nowhere near. Because Lincoln needed 152 to win, he got 180. So actually, even if it had just been Lincoln against, and we took the other three candidates and put them all into one, Lincoln still would have won. And this almost it makes even more strongly the point that the South were making at this point, which is we can be ignored. Now that's probably, well, is the wrong way to look at it, because the votes in the Electoral College are based largely on population, and actually places with small population are overrepresented. So it's not that the South is being ignored, it is the South is smaller. It doesn't have the weight of numbers, and in particular because of the issue of slavery, and there's this calculation which goes back to the Constitution of slaves counting as 3/5 of a person in terms of the calculations for how many electoral college votes you get and how many members of the House of Representatives you get. So the issue here really is sectional voting, and if the South pushes along the line towards sectional voting, it will lose because it's smaller. Now, if we look at the impact then, and there's some really mind-blowing stuff on this. Lincoln didn't really make any kind of effort, because he didn't campaign in the South. He didn't make any real effort to promise not to do anything or to do anything. But he had made that promise before. It's not widely reported in the South. He doesn't keep on saying it. In fact, he doesn't campaign, which is really the convention at the time. So he doesn't reassure the South, but he says he won't interfere with where it already exists. He is portrayed across the South as an abolitionist. People go back to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln was limited once he was in power because there was a Democrat-controlled Congress. So even if he'd wanted to abolish slavery where it already exists, he wouldn't have been able to anyway, because Congress could have just stopped him. Now, Lincoln winning was a trigger for secession. And South Carolina secedes, first to secede in 1860 in December, and that goes back to what I was talking about on the previously about this idea that they saw that this idea of northern dominance had been confirmed, and that they were being picked on and not treated fairly. Now, one of the other things that complicates it all is there should really have been an opportunity for yet another kind of compromise, and we've seen compromises in previous videos. But the problem with it is Lincoln believes in the slave power conspiracy. So he believes that he can't trust the South, that they're out for power, that they're out to push slavery. And so he's unwilling to work with them and compromise, which is something that maybe could have prevented the war that happened. Right, so please remember to like, to share, to subscribe. Leave me any comments. Thank you very much for watching. Our next video will go on to the secession and the outbreak of war, and then we'll keep on going. We'll keep on going through the war itself and on into Reconstruction. So stay tuned. Thank you.